Welcome back to our panel discussion, Threat Intelligence Tackling the Cyber Arms Race in Government, sponsored by KPMG, here on federalnewsradio.com and Federal News Radio 1500 AM. My guests today are Pat Flanders, the Chief Information Officer at the Defense Health Agency. Mark Johnson is Chief Information Security Officer at the U.S. Agency for International Development, and Tony Hubbard is a principal at KPMG. I'm Tom Temin, your moderator. And before the break, we were talking about the decision tree and the decision matrix that happens. We heard about it at the DHA. Mark, tell us about how the decisions are made to act, who makes it, at what level, depending on the threat at USAID.
A lot of the work in terms of threats and risk analysis and so forth is done through processes and procedures, and that's because of what DHS processes have set up, OMB mandates, things like that, and also internal agency processes and procedures at USAID. So a lot of it's very much following a playbook, and that in most cases that works well. And I want to go back to a point that Tony made, because I think he hit on something really important here in terms of risk management. Risk management for any kind of cybersecurity program is vital, and enterprise risk management is really key. I think it's one of those things as we move into the future. I think we're seeing an evolution from the cybersecurity programs being looked at in isolation to being looked at as part of an overall enterprise risk management program. I know a lot of the OMB mandates have moved agencies in that direction so that they set up enterprise risk management programs. USAID has one. We have an enterprise risk management council on which I sit, and we holistically look at all kinds of threats. Some of the ones that Patrick and Tony were mentioning. Not just cybersecurity threats. And so cyber fits into that, and we can evaluate as an agency from a strategic level our program and the types of resourcing we want to do to it, and some of the future directions that we want it to take. So I think if you look at the private sector, they've for years had a situation where if you have, go back to the Target hack of 6 years ago, or go back to the Equifax hack of last year. These are things which move stock prices and really have a very strong effect on the public, all those folks that are affected, and also on the institution that's been involved in that. And so that's forced the discipline of enterprise risk management, and that's also coming through government through the OMB mandates.
Right, so I guess the thinking is the cyber risk might be a risk to cyber systems, but it can also be a financial risk, a reputational risk, an ability to deliver mission risk, and not just something that will affect software. It's not an isolated phenomenon.
It's part of the whole portfolio of risks that an agency would have.
Yeah, that true also, Pat, at DHA?
Yes, absolutely. So the network and cyber intelligence is works closely with the DNI and overarching intelligence and operations. And in fact, they actually treat the cyber attack surface as an operational theater.
Okay, well, yeah, so makes sense. And in that vein, you have an example of where a commercial contractor found something and brought it to you that was kind of historic.
Yeah. So kind of back to that first question, it's not just about the things you own. It requires close coordination, formal agreements, kind of the playbook that you were describing, with your commercial partners. And so if you recall the WannaCry virus last year, so the first actual copy of the virus came from one of our contractors. I mean, they called us up and said, there's a problem, we've seen this, and they gave the first copy in the United States to us, to the FBI and to the DoD.
It was a pretty small file, wasn't it?
Oh, I don't know. Probably.
How do they find it? Do we know? Or?
So they overseas found it, and then sent it to the United States so that we could be on the lookout for it.
All right, in this context of decision making, say a WannaCry hits, and remedies are developed, to what degree are the agencies looking at autonomy in response, which is the opposite of a decision process tree that you both described? Tony, why don't we ask you first? Is this a trend that you're seeing, across the customer base, of the desire for tools to become more than just alerting mechanisms, but also responsive mechanisms?
Absolutely, and I think Mark had alluded to this earlier, and just there's so much information, and just you're never going to be able to throw enough people at that challenge. And we can talk later on about the challenge in general from a cybersecurity perspective around recruiting the good people and finding good people. But irregardless of that, you're never going to have enough to manage the types of data that the Mark and Pat's organizations and others have to deal with. So having automated techniques to help manage that, and to a certain extent even through process automation, help our artificial intelligence, helping make some of those decisions for the technician is going to be critical. And I think the key would be, Mark talked about this earlier, there's so many tools out there, very capable tools, but at the end of the day, there's also many examples where there's a lot of tools that maybe organizations either aren't using the full benefit of, or taking advantage of all the capabilities, or there's sometimes a trend to just get the next shiny thing in terms of a tool or a capability. So I think tying it back to making sure that you're getting the right tools in, using those tools to the full benefit, and tying that all into that governance and enterprise risk management process that we talked about earlier, I think is essential. But there's no question we're going to, as an industry from a cyber perspective, we need to get better at automating a lot of these capabilities.
Yeah, it seems like sometimes the tools are designed to sell more tools and layer them on there. Mark, is automation part of your strategy for the future?
Yeah, absolutely.
If AI is part of that, artificial intelligence, you might want to discuss that too, but otherwise, what about automation?
Yeah, definitely. I think Pat and Tony make some very good points here. One of our strategies at USAID is to, in terms of our cyber program, is to automate as much as possible. It would be things like leveraging cybersecurity automation and orchestration strategies, particularly at the cloud level. We know Vivek Kundar's cloud first philosophy from 7-8 years ago. The government's moving heavily in that direction. USAID has moved heavily in that direction. So we're looking to address today's cyber threats in real time and free up our analysis time, valuable human resource time, to address more advanced threats than currently face the federal government. Specifically, we're looking at leveraging things like artificial intelligence, blockchain and other distributed ledger technology solutions, machine learning technologies. An example would be log analysis. You can an agency or any other organization could literally have billions of log events to look through before, during, and after an event, and we believe, and I think there's a lot of kind of commercial activity in this area, that there's some very good automated solutions that can really make a dent in that problem, make a serious dent in that problem, to free up people to do other things rather than the kind of like the very manual process of going through millions and billions of logs, which as Tony mentioned, there just aren't enough people to throw at that problem type of thing. So that's
also can save you some storage too.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So that's one example. So yeah, we are very aggressively looking at automation and how that can play a role in this. Basically our agency, because we're so spread out and because of the nature of the work we do, we were one of the earlier adopters of cloud technology. We have very little, if any, we have virtually no legacy systems in place. So and we try to push the envelope in terms of innovation. So we're aggressively looking at automation in terms of our cyber program.
Okay, how about DHA? Automation, I guess, could be a two-edged sword in a medical situation.
Right, and so I want more of it. Absolutely, I want more of it. I want artificial intelligence because the process we have now is absolutely human intensive. Manual risk management framework, evaluations of controls for all the devices that we have across the military health system takes time. And if there were a way to automate that was certified for use in the DoD environment, because we have very, very strict rules about how we do this. But I think that's really my number one wish for what we need going forward to do this.
And do those capabilities exist at this point?
So there are some things, I'm not naming names, but there are two products that I've seen that are very exciting to me. And I know one of them is being piloted right now with the Defense Information Systems Agency. And so I'm hopeful for some of that. But back to the beauty and the good things that come from formal agreements, formal playbooks, is that when you're going to change something like this, it's a slow process because everything has to be formally changed so that there are no seams and gaps as you straddle changing from one technology to another.
Seems like there's a way to maybe not automate that, but at least computer rev it up so that a book becomes something you can move the boxes around in a process flow.
Right. And so things like in the Department of Defense, we have two-factor authentication, we have common access cards, right? And so any new technology has to work with the common access cards, right? And so, and all the other things that we have. And so that's, those solutions have to be architected, tested, validated, tested again, patched, fixed, and then we put them out there. But I'm hopeful that sometime in the next 12 to 18 months we'll get some movement on some of these new AI-based tools.
Yeah, it's been about 3 years since a former defense CIO said it's time to get rid of the CAC card. So that probably means you've got another 7 years or so of it.
If I could, Tom, before we leave the topic of automation, I realize it's not necessarily threat intelligence oriented, but we've already alluded a couple times to the risk management framework process, the RMF process, and I just wanted to emphasize how I think automating that process could be so beneficial in a lot of ways, because whether in the threat intelligence concept, the systems and the networks that are supporting that capability, if you can work a more efficient process through and get that system through the RMF process and accredited, it would just, again, there's just not enough people to throw at the RMF process as it is currently constituted. So automating that whole RMF process, I think, it's definitely an area that's ripe for automation, no question.
Yeah, is there capability now to do that automation out there?
If I could just add to the past
Sure.
two speakers, I'm in total agreement. The amount of resources the federal government devotes to the security assessment and authorization process to get an ATO for a system, it's really that. I think that's an area that's ripe for innovation, if you will. And I go back to kind of the old saying, if you can conceive it and believe it, you can achieve it. We've not seen, as of this point, an automated tool that right now that we want to buy that will automate the ATO process. We do believe that one's going to come, and when it's there, USAID would love to purchase it because there is an excessive amount of cycles devoted to authorizing these systems, even with the continuous monitoring program. So I think that's another area where automation can make a huge dent and lead to efficiencies. One of the common themes throughout federal government IT is do more with less. And this is definitely an area where that can be done, and I would venture that 5 years from now, if we have the same panel, we'll be talking about the various solutions that have been implemented to do this.
We'll have it 5 months from now. We don't need to wait 5 years. But you mentioned the ATO and you mentioned FedRAMP, which was conceived to kind of speed up ATO of cloud providers. And now it's really extended to a lot of services, and software packages are also going through FedRAMP that might be cloud deployed. So it's not just a cloud facility anymore process. And so I wanted to pull on that string a little bit too, because you mentioned cloud. I mean, does cloud, and every agency is pursuing it pretty much now, does it increase security? Does it decrease it by increasing the number of attack surfaces? Or how does the tool set, the development of threat intelligence get morphed, I guess, by cloud deployment?
There's a number of advantages. Your overall operations costs go way down. There's fewer servers to maintain, because of virtualization and so forth. There's data center drops, and it's sort of like alchemy, in that you're changing capex into opex with your payments to the cloud provider. So there's a reason that cloud computing has taken off for a lot of very good technological and a lot of very sound business reasons. So, while the jury is still out on the security, I think there are, a number of benefits also to cloud computing from security, and a single point of failure, if you will, and so forth, reduce attack surface and things like that. And again, I think if we go back to the playbook idea, which Pat and Tony have talked about, I think if the processes are in place, and there's a sound cybersecurity program in place, and we have the right cyber threat intelligence, and all these elements of a good program, I think cloud will work fine, just as good or better than the old way, where agencies had these massive data centers and lots of servers and lots of people to maintain them on a round-the-clock basis.
Just get your service level agreements right.
That's the point I was just going to make in terms of governance around, because I agree with everything Mark said, but the governance around that, making sure you've got good, tight service level agreements, as applicable third-party assessments, SOC 1 type of reports and processes to make sure that those providers are doing what they need to do from a controls and perspective. And I think the key theme is that oftentimes you hear, well, we're going to outsource our data, but you're not really outsourcing your data. That is still your data. You might be outsourcing the mechanics around processing and storage, but it's still ultimately your data as an agency. And I think that's critical to make sure that you understand and maintain the ownership of that and the accountability around that.
And it's probably fair to say the cloud providers have a pretty strong interest of their own business in maintaining security, because if they don't do that, then they'd be out of business.
Certainly.
And so I'll just talk just the medical part of this, because medical is a little bit different, right? Mm-hmm. Because you have, I think the state of the art right now, because in hospitals you have all these devices, right? And many of them require on-prem servers and stacks, right? So there's no way around. So I think the state of the art is on-prem support for those medical devices, on-prem support for VDI, right? And then enterprise applications, like your electronic health record, migrated to the cloud, and that's just exactly what we're doing. I mean, we have a commercial cloud. We bought a commercial product. It's being hosted in their commercial cloud with in a hybrid way, when there's a special DoD part, but we do actually share some services with the commercial side, and then of course we rely on commercial partners for things like pharmacy and stuff like that.
Yeah, I guess I can imagine the day when there's a cloud instance of the controller for a surgical remote control machine. That could be a little scary, I guess, huh?
So the scary thing for me right now is telehealth. Right? So telehealth is this very broad, where they want to use cameras to remotely see patients, and a lot of devices associated with it, and it's new, and so it has to be ATO'd, and it involves communications networks, so there's a lot going on that front.
Okay, good place to take a break. I'm your moderator, Tom Temin. This panel discussion is Threat Intelligence, Tackling the Cyber Arms Race in Government, sponsored by KPMG, here on federalnewsradio.com and Federal News Radio 1500 AM.